On this episode of Dead Last, we're checking out another filmography of a famous horror director, and this time we're headed to Italy to check out and rank the works of one of the masters, Dario Argento. I was really looking forward to this one because most of the movies on this list I haven't seen in such a long time that it was great to revisit them. And we didn't add all of his works to the list, so this is a sort of a selected filmography, if you will. And I chose these 11 films to rank. I basically started at the beginning of his career and went up to a certain point, but then just added in Mother of Tears to get the whole Three Mothers trilogy in there. And of course, I had to add Dracula 3D because it was his most attention-getting film of the past, 20 years or so. And as usual, I sent this list out to my patrons to rank, and they did what they do. They put their favorite as their number one, worth 1 point, and their least favorite in dead last, here worth 11 points. So there was a total of 16 entries this month, so the best score that a movie could have would be 16 points. That would be if everyone rated a movie as their number one, and the lowest would be 176 points, and that's if every person rated a movie dead last. And I just want to point out that in the entire history of the show, no movie has ever swept either the top spot or the dead last position. And when we get right down to it, this month is no exception to that. Because in our dead last position, with a very low 158 points, and this was very, very close, but our dead last, I guess, winner is Mother of Tears. This one was actually ranked dead last 7 times, almost half the time, but it was actually ranked in first place 1 time, and I guess I should note that that number 1 vote was the only one that didn't place this film in either dead last or 10th place. And that number 1 was not me, because I put this one as my dead last. And here's the thing. For me, you have to judge this film on 2 levels. First of all, you have to judge it as an Argento film in general, just one of his collection. But then you also have to judge this based on the fact that it's the 3rd entry of a trilogy. And I'm sad to say that on both of those levels, there's no way to not view this one as an absolute disaster. It's just, I don't know, just embarrassing. So let's look at it in terms of a part of the Mother's trilogy. If you watch this film anywhere near your viewing of Suspiria or even Inferno, you'll be left wondering if this is even the same director. Everything feels off, from the look of it, to the performances, to the world that it's created. Witches were like this dark, hidden society in the other films, and here it's like they're a group of loud, crazy party girls. And sure, both of the earlier ones had meandering plots that didn't really add up to a complete story, but those films were more about the styling and the artistry than it was the story. And without all of that, you're just left with this. And even if you strip all of that away and think of this as a freestanding film, it doesn't improve any. It's just ugly in the way that it looks and feels. And there's movies in which you could say that as a positive, but not here. Ozzy is totally flat as our lead, and what's the point of having Udo Kier if he's just going to bland his way through the whole role? And why even bring him back in the first place in a new role? It's clear that they wanted to link this to Suspiria lore, so they bring back an original actor, but then they just make him unconnected anyway? I will give this a tiny bit of credit though. It has one solid unintentional laugh in a scene that I think is supposed to be shocking as a woman throws her baby off a bridge, but it's just so clearly an unmoving baby doll that it is pure comedy. Like, this is as horrifying as watching someone dispose of an old Cabbage Patch Kid. Heading down to number 10, and this was really close, but because there was 1 point difference, and coming in with 157 points is the notorious Dracula 3D. This one actually got the most dead last votes with 8 in total, and its best score that it got was 4th place, but even though it got all those DLs. It had several other middle ranks, and real quick, this got 8 and Mother got 7, so that's 15 out of the 16 dead lasts available, which means that there was only one person that didn't vote for one of these two movies as their bottom of the barrel. I didn't have it down that far though, because I put it in 8th, and I suppose I have to explain that. And look, there's no way that I'm going to try to pretend that this is a good movie. It is a terrible, terrible movie. But the fact of the matter is that it's so freaking goofy that it's sort of fun to watch. It's like Argento just straight up forgot everything that he knew about filmmaking when he was doing this one. Like he had some sort of weird amnesia that took him down to the level of a first-year film student. And watching all these films together, and then getting to this one, it's the weirdest feeling because it just doesn't seem like it could possibly be the same person. And sure, Mother of Tears suffers from this as well, but at least that movie felt professional. This feels like someone's very first film with very little clue on how this whole process works. And you know it's gonna be insane from like minute 3 when you get a wacky CG owl flying down, but then you also get weird CG wolf, CG flies, and who can forget the all-time classic addition to Dracula lore, the giant praying mantis. But here's the thing, and I know that I differ from some people with this whole philosophy, but all of that terribleness is why I put it a touch higher, because this is just so entertaining to watch. It swerves so far into the realm of unintentional comedy that I find it fun, and I'd rather see something that fails, but its failures are a good time to watch, versus something that fails and has me looking at my watch. And there's no way to look at your watch when you have Ozzy Argento going up in some of the worst CG flames I have ever seen. All right, let's go to our number 9 film, and it was a pretty big drop down in points, going all the way down to 130 here, and it's Four Flies on Grey Velvet. The lowest score this one got was 10th place, which it got once, and the best score that it got was 5th place, which it received twice. I had this one right where it landed since I also had this in 9th place, and even though I have it pretty low, it's still a pretty solid film. I mean, if nothing else, that killer mask is great, even though you don't really see it that much throughout the film. It's effective enough that I really wish that they had used it more. But right off the bat, this is a very different film than the two that preceded it. It feels totally different in terms of theme and execution, and the highlight for me is the park sequence with the woman trapped in the walled-off area, which is a pretty big fear of mine. I don't think I'm claustrophobic, really, but then I watch something like this, and I think, maybe? The soundtrack is pretty interesting and fits the theme, and sometimes the drumming sounds work to help build the atmosphere and tension, and others, it kinda hampers it. It was Ennio Morricone's last work with Argento for a while because they had a big falling out over his work for this film. There were some tracks that he didn't want included that Dario ran with anyway, and I kind of get Ennio's point because as great as the score can be at several points, it's really out of place, which is weird because this one has a bit of a musical backdrop. And it's also kind of odd because it's a film that's firmly rooted in reality and skirts the fantastic. And then just brings in this eye imprint element that ends up not even being that overly relevant to the plot. So it's weird that it was even included. And apparently Argento didn't want to, so I assume that was a studio request. And as we're about to see with the other ones coming up, man, he was really into this whole the villain's dead, the end. Coming in at the number 8 spot with 124 points, somewhat close to Four Flies, I suppose, is another early entry, the Cat09 Tails. This one was also never ranked dead last, but was ranked 10th 3 times, and the best score that it got was also 5th place, which it got 1 time. I had this one a touch lower though, since I had it in 10th place, and I really want to like this one more than I actually do. Although that being said, I do think that it's a pretty decent watch, but it's just not really that much fun. In fact, it's a bit confusing and a muddle of a plot that goes all over the place with no clear direction. And now that may sound like pretty much any of Argento's films, but here it just feels less focused in general, and when it gets to the big reveal, it's not really that satisfying. But it has some good points, and like I love that there's a guy who runs into a blind man and is like,
Ma stia attento con quel bastone. Scusi.
And then feels bad because he realizes the guy is blind. But like, what did you think the stick was? Did he think that this was just a man who needed a walking stick but instead was just sort of waving it around in front of himself? So something that I'm going to point out a bit here is that there was a pretty common theme in a lot of Argento's films, and I mean a lot, in which a character has a very important bit of information that's essential to solving the crimes, or there's a piece of art that contains a vital clue, if only they could remember it or decipher it or what have you, and that's definitely in play here. And also, as only his second film, this is where he starts to up the violence level, leaning more into the murders and the suspense of the death scenes as opposed to the intrigue of solving the murder, which will continue to shift as his career went on. As such, it features some cool kills and one pretty awesome elevator death scene, but beyond that, it also features one of the slickest pickup lines of all time.
Lo sai quante persone fanno l'amore al mondo ogni secondo?
No.
780 in media. Davvero. A me dispiacerebbe.
Here comes number 7, and it was another rather large drop down in points because with 91 points, 30 points lower than Cat, is Opera. Again, it wasn't ranked dead last, but it did get ranked in 9th once, and its best score was 3rd place, which it got twice. I had this as number 7 myself, and actually for the rest of this list, my ranks match up where everything ended up. And this one is one that I'm on the fence on because I like it and I think it's good, but there's also something about it that doesn't really work for me. This is definitely into the whole meta introspection of Argento's work, since there's a certain inference to be made from the whole pins under the eyes kind of thing. Argento's tone with the death scenes has gotten more and more extreme, as if he's forcing the viewers, us, to look on as he kills these characters. And that's reflected in the storyline. Like here, I'm putting this horrible torture in front of you, but you can't look away. Although in the film sense, it's literal. But on the other hand, it's starting to feel a bit formulaic at this point, and it feels just like a bit stale. But that may be due to watching several in a row that tend to all be pretty similar. He definitely has this whole thing that he does, and I guess that since this is like the 8th movie in a row doing that thing, it just felt like it wasn't giving me anything different. There's some pretty cool stylistic flares though. It has a bullet POV shot that was so awesome that Quentin Tarantino saw it and said, hey, I can rip that off, but I will never forgive Fangoria for ruining the reveal of the killer because they just had to run a picture of an effect. The ending is a bit ridiculous though, since you have this whole thing where it appears that the killer committed suicide by setting himself on fire, and then it cuts to a while later and our heroine is recovering in the countryside, but the news reveals that, hey, that wasn't a body after all, it was just a mannequin. And did it really take them that long to figure that out? Like, what kind of forensics team did they have there? Hey, this guy over here is dead. But wait, he sure seems kind of stiff. Is that rigor mortis? And he sure smells funny, almost like burnt plastic. Does that smell different than burning flesh? I'm not sure.
I can't stand it anymore!
Dropping down now, we're headed to number 6, and it was another one that was fairly close because it was only 2 points away from Opera, and with 89 points, it's Argento's first film, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. The lowest score it got was 8th place, which it took 3 times, but it also got a 2nd place spot. I also had this in 6th, and in terms of early works, this is actually a pretty solid go. Lots of Argento trademarks starting to form here. It has a piece of art that invokes a memory. The killer in black with black gloves, a half-remembered detail, and sets into play a motif that we'll see again pretty frequently with Argento films, the fake-out killer. There's a running bit that he has where you think that the movie has found its killer and everything is cool, but the rug gets pulled out, and then there's this whole other mystery going on. Interestingly, this feels less like his later films with less violence and gore, with more emphasis on the investigation than the murders, which gives it a more Hitchcock kind of feel. Like I had flashes of Spellbound here at times, and it's less of a horror movie than you would expect for this type of thing. And it just feels more like an old-fashioned crime thriller, again, like Hitchcock. And then the Ennio Morricone's score steals the deal and sort of gives us a roadmap for Goblin to follow in the future, and basically just sort of stands up and says, hey, this guy here is Dario Argento, and his movies are gonna have good music. That's gonna be a thing. And I have to tell you, Bring in the Perverts is a great way to start a scene.
Bring in the perverts.
Speaking of close calls, the number 5 movie was just a single point above The Bird, and the final ranking I received switched their places. And with 88 points, we have Inferno. People were really split on this one, and the lowest score it got was 9th place, which it got twice, but it did get one number 1 ranking. I was neither of those since I had it in 5th place myself, and since this is right in the middle of my list, it's pretty fitting since that's about how I feel about it. Middling. It has some good stuff happening, but it's never that great, and the biggest problem with Inferno is that it came right after Suspiria. It was like Argento knew that he wouldn't be able to compete with that level of care, so he just said, how about we dial it down to like 40%, and then still just roll with that fractured narrative. And the problem is that isn't as compelling without the artistic stuff happening all around it. The best parts of this one are the parts that feel like its predecessor with the artful touches, and the worst parts are the ones that are just like, oh hey, this is just a regular movie here. It definitely has some high points though, like I'll always love the lecture room tease with the third mother, and the underwater sequence is just so well done, even if it doesn't really make much sense. But I think if you've seen this one, that's the stuff that really stands out. And I really think that a few of the movies that I rated lower than this one are better movies than this, but I like the feeling of this one more. Perhaps because I'm more partial to the supernatural element to just the standard giallo stuff, but this is the atmosphere that I'm looking for from Argento. The ending is pretty wild as well, even if it's a bit anticlimactic, but the reveal of the witch's look is pretty awesome.
They call us! Death!
Coming in at number 4, getting quite a bit lower in points since it's here with 76, is Phenomena, or possibly Creepers, whatever you might know it as. It's another one that folks were split with, and again, its lowest ranking was 9th, but it got the first place spot twice. Again, I had this where it landed, in 4th, and I have to admit, going into this list, I thought that I would have this higher than I did. I thought for sure I would put it in my top 3, because I have really fond memories of it, but really, this movie's just such a weird mishmash of elements that aren't that fleshed out. There's the killer element, her bug-talking abilities, the monkey, sleepwalking. It's got all these random things that just don't add up. Argento was basically just like, well, I have all these random ideas, so I might as well make a movie out of them somehow. And hey, it has a ladybug POV shot, and how can you really argue with that? But yeah, it was also my first Argento film, and possibly his most American feeling, but mainly due to the presence of Donald Pleasence and Jennifer Connelly. There was no way to escape this one on cable TV back in the day, but one of the biggest fumbles here is the soundtrack, which contains a handful of very inappropriate music cues. Like, there's a stalking scene with this cool metal tune playing, and the song's fine, but it just doesn't really fit the mood of what's being shown on screen. I still have this kind of high because, yeah, it's just so damn watchable, and there's a lot of fun happening, and there's nothing inherently wrong with it. But when it comes to overall quality, I had to admit that there were 3 movies that were a touch better.
I love you. I love you all.
Here we go now into the top 3, and the points got pretty close. I guess a little close for the next 2, but our number 3 with 60 points is Profondo Rosso, or Deep Red. And yeah, this is the only other film on the list to get a dead last ranking, which it got 1 time, but it took the first place spot twice. I had this one in my top 3 as my number 3, and I have to tell you, from the opening shots, it's apparent that a corner has been turned in terms of his artistry. It's insane to me that this is only 2 movies away from 4 Flies, considering just how much more polished that it looks. The addition of Goblin with the score is a plus and a little bit of a minus. It's great because, you know, Goblin, but it's also a minus because I love Morricone as well. But either way, it's a win, although I admit that this one's a touch monotonous with a repeated guitar riff over and over and over again. And it's here that we're seeing the gore-loving director that we all know and dig, with a pretty big jump in the gore quotient, and this is the movie that made me realize why people love Argento and why his later films fell so far out of favor. The plot and storyline of this film is really no different from his earlier giallos. It has the same themes and some of the same little quirks, with the man investigating who's not the police, the work of art that contains the key to solving the mystery, but the difference here is in the visual storytelling. There's such care taken here in telling the story in such a unique way with colors and bold shot selections, and the background story here is really no better than, say, Crystal Plumage, but it just looks like it was crafted with infinitely more care. You can see the artist forming, and watching this, you can see how something like Suspiria could happen. And that's 100% where his strengths lay. And I will say that overall, this may be the best melding of those 2 things. This feels equally visual and story-driven, and the most balanced of his whole repertoire. Only 2 left to go, and at number 2, I don't think that this will be a big surprise, but with 56 points, we have Tenebrae. The lowest score this one got was 7th place, which it got 1 time, and interestingly, it's the only film in the top 5 to get no number 1 votes, but it did get 6 second place votes. I had this in 2nd place myself, of course, and you know that things are gonna at least be kind of okay when you see John Saxon, because John Saxon instantly improves anything he's in. And this one's weird because it has more in common with his earlier films than where I feel he went. Like, this seems more like Deep Red Argento than Suspiria Argento, but it's still slick and stylish, but in like a different way. There's still some really stunning shots, like the shot through the woman's shirt as she's being killed is excellent. And the mystery is well done and actually misdirects you in the best way. In fact, Argento liked this particular twist so much that he reused it for a later film, The Stendhal Syndrome. Plus, it utilizes Argento's whole I sort of remember this thing plot point in a really great way. You can see him sort of start to kind of dial down the style here, although it's still present, but you can almost see a gradual drop off from Suspiria to Inferno to this. And the interesting aspect is that this is seen as Argento kind of directly addressing his critics. If opera is a meta conversation about him as a director and the victims as a sort of audience, this one is his addressing the reporters and critics of horror films at the time, which is slightly ironic because they seem to be accusing the writer in the movie of being responsible for the deaths and violence that spring out of inspiration from his horror works. And he's all sorts of blasé about it, as you would imagine. But by the film's end, he's shown to be a murderer and capable of very violent acts. So what is Argento saying about himself here?
Know something? I read all of those books. Agatha Christie, Mickey Spillane, Rex Stout, Egmont Payne. And I'm a detective, right?
And you never guess who the murderer is.
Right, never.
And of course, that leaves our top of the heap. And this was one of the biggest blowouts we've had in a while, and with a mere 27 points, it's Suspiria. The lowest score it got was one fourth place spot, and in fact, that one vote was the only one that was not in the top 3. Every other ranking had this in first, second, or third. It took the top spot 10 times, so like about 70% of the rankings. I had it as number 1 myself because remember what I said about Deep Red and how with Argento's films, it's never really about the plot and it's more about the visuals and atmosphere. This movie proves that because there really isn't a plot. It's just a series of weird and bizarre set pieces that introduce an assortment of characters and then kill them off in increasingly strange ways. The story itself just sort of winds around and stalls for time before the finale is kicked off in that classic Argento way. Someone remembers a key element that they couldn't up until now. But it really doesn't matter. Every frame here looks like a gorgeous painting, and the sheer care that it took in crafting this film is astounding. From the first scene with Susie arriving at the airport and getting in that taxi, you know that you're in for something special. I remember introducing this movie to my wife, and she really was not into it from the description, but as soon as it began, she was just mesmerized and said, "This isn't a movie, this is the prettiest thing that I've ever seen," and kept making me pause on some of the scenes to stare at the detail going on in the shot. And there is that level of detail. Plus, Goblin stepped up their game big time on this one. The music feels as integral to what's going on as any of the visuals. And several of Argento's films have great scores that don't really mesh all that well with what's on screen, but not here. It's perfect, and it helps that the music is just so off-putting. And legend has it that this film was written for the girls to be much younger, although I'm not 100% sure how true that is. It's apparent in having the doorknobs placed so high, as if the women were children, but that positioning is actually common in some places like Australia, so who knows really, but it does explain some of the characters' behaviors. So there you have it, 11 classic Argento's Giallo films ranked up, and let's take a look at our list here, and yep, I'm happier with this list than I have been for a while. With the exception of 2 films, this matches my ranking almost exactly. Just swap Dracula and Cat, and you have my list. So this is all good here. But what did you think? Do you agree with this? Let me know how you'd rank these in the comments below. Do you think that Suspiria is overrated or that Mother of Tears is better than we did? I want to hear it. And also, please like this video if you enjoyed it. If you enjoy what you're seeing on the channel, please consider hitting that subscribe button and click on the bell to get notified when new videos are released. And also check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines. These guys over here did, and you can get the rank dead last videos every single month. We get new videos to talk about every single month. So yeah, please do that. And otherwise, I will see you very shortly for another great video. Thanks a lot, guys, and bye-bye.